My mother was not yet 18 when she met my father. He was 4 years older than she was. They fell in love, and as often happens in such cases, she became pregnant. After waiting 3 months until my mother turned 18, they got married. Anyway, at the time of the wedding, she was 3 months pregnant. Determined not to depend on my parents, they rented a room. So I was born when my mother was not yet 19. She got married right after high school, and, of course, my mother had no education except secondary school. My father by that time had graduated from Polytechnic Institute and was working at the factory as a foreman of the preparations area in the machine shop. My mother was on maternity leave, and my father earned money and helped her as much as he could to raise me. He took over at night, giving me a break from the always screaming baby. Washed and ironed diapers, ran to get medicine when I was sick, basically did everything a loving husband and father should do. When my mother came out of maternity leave, she went to medical school majoring in medicine, and I was given to live with my grandmother, my mother's mother. Medical school was in another city, so that my mother I saw very rarely, mostly when she came on vacation. Her arrival was for me not just a holiday, but rather a universal event. I remember well how the three of us used to take walks together, go to the movies. When my mother was home, I was allowed to watch television late into the night. One bad thing was that vacation time would end soon, and she would leave for another town to go to school. Then the gray days of waiting for my mother would begin again. My dad supported me as much as he could. He took me to his place on weekends, taught me how to ski and skate. He also took me to first grade. I still remember how we went with him to meet my mother when she came for the vacations. The train came late at night, and I had to walk 3 kilometers to the station. Dad would take me on his shoulders, and we would walk for a long time along the night road. I felt so good that sometimes I even fell asleep on his shoulders. Mom graduated when I was in the 2nd grade. She served 6 years and came home to continue her internship. She was assigned to our city hospital. By that time, my father had already bought an apartment. Nothing interfered with our happy family life. I must say that my mother was a very beautiful girl in her youth. She had a slender figure, blonde hair, and piercing blue eyes. Understandably, my father lost his head after the first meeting. Over the years her beauty has not only not faded, but on the contrary, it has blossomed and shone in new colors. And after 40 years, my mother was mistaken for a young girl. When I walked down the street with her, everyone thought we were a couple in love, not mother and son. After school, I went to the Aviation Institute, and by the time I was 23, I was a pilot. I was lucky enough to work on domestic airlines for months, and then I was sent to South Africa as a co-pilot on the Embraer. Our plane flew charter flights all over Africa. We also flew to Paris, London, Washington. After a year of work, the first pilot went home for family reasons, and I took his place. I went home a couple of times. I was always greeted at the airport by my father and a dazzlingly beautiful young woman, my mother. And so my time abroad was coming to an end. I bought gifts for my parents. My mother a set of French cosmetics and my father a magnificent selection of collectible tin soldiers. My father loved to tinker with them in his spare time. He made dioramas of battles trying to keep historical authenticity. The plane landed and taxied to the terminal. I took my time getting dressed, let the passengers who were always in a hurry to leave the plane through, took my bag, thanked the students, and got off the plane. I went through passport control, got my luggage, and began to look for my parents in the crowd of people meeting me. It seemed that they were delayed, but I was not upset and went to the cab rank. Thanks to the fact that there were no problems with that nowadays. When I got out of the airport building and walked to the parking lot, a familiar voice called me. I looked around and saw my mother getting out of the chic car and waving to me. Wow, did they win the lottery? To buy a car like that, my mom looked absolutely stunning. Beautifully styled hair, cream coat, light silk scarf, and high-heeled shoes. It was definitely a lottery. Mom, you're alone. Where's Dad? Isn't he sick by any chance? Getting the car. Euro. So much has happened. We'll talk on the way. I sat in the back seat next to Mom. The driver and a young man sat in the front. As soon as I closed the door, he turned and asked my mother. Where are we going, Helen? Home, Misha, Mom answered in a very hostile way, looked at me and smiled. Yura, it's been 6 months since I left Vitali. I now live with the man I love. I didn't want to tell you about it while you were working. I didn't want to worry you. My current husband's name is Sergey. He is my first and only love. Fate separated us, but 2 years ago we met again and could not part. She was visibly worried, her face flushed, her eyes glittered excitedly. I did not immediately realize that Vitali, she calls my father. But that was not all. My mother told me that he was not my real father. In fact, my father was her husband, Sergey. When my mom got pregnant, he had to leave her under pressure from her parents. And my mom had to marry Vitali, that the child that is me had at least some father. But all these years, she loved Sergey. Mom was still saying something, but I couldn't hear her anymore. My heart was pounding in my throat and my ears were ringing. I asked where my father was. I mean, Vitali. My mother shrugged her shoulders nervously and assumed that he was at home in our old apartment. He's playing soldiers, he's out of his mind. I could hear the contempt in her voice. Where are we going now? I asked. Home, my son. We live in the countryside in a cottage community. We have a 3-story house. Serge, your real father, is a big businessman. We prepared a room for you on the 2nd floor. Wait till you see for yourself. Mon smiled and somehow bird-like kissed me on the cheek, leaving a lipstick mark on it. We finally arrived at a big 3-story house surrounded by trees and lawns. On the doorstep, we were met by a man who was no longer young, but very imposing. As I realized the same Sergey. Mother jumped out of the car like a dragonfly and kissed him on the lips. Saryosha, this is Euro, your son. She hugged Sergey and pushed him towards me. Well, hello, son. Sergey stepped towards me and held out his hand. Hello. His palm was somehow sluggish and damp. Come on in. It's your house. He pretended to smile and made an inviting gesture. I turned to my mother. I still have things to do. I have to go to the airline office, report my arrival. I took a box of cosmetics out of my bag. This is for you, Mom. Thank you. She shook her luxurious hair. How nice, son. I looked at my mother knowing full well that she doesn't need these cosmetics now. Her Sergey will buy her a whole perfume store if necessary. But the rules of etiquette had to be observed. Stay for breakfast, then go. Mont took me by the arm. Wash my face, rest from the road. Come on, then business comes first. Helen, a man has to do things first. Sergey smiled. Let him go, and we'll wait. Take my car, the driver will take you. And wait as long as necessary. It will be better if I take a cab. Don't worry. I kissed my mother and walked out of the gate and dialed the number of the cab. Only when I got in the cab did the full meaning of what had happened come to me. My mother had lived with my father for 27 years. No quarrels, no scandals, always even. I always thought they loved each other. But as soon as Sergey showed up, my mother didn't hesitate to leave my father and rush off to him for her happiness. And she drags me with her. And the old husband? You helped raise someone else's child. You can be free. She's made her decision, and I have to rush headlong into the arms of my new father. A father is not the one who conceived, but the one who raised. I've heard that hackneyed phrase more than once, but it turns out it's not really true, or rather not at all. I imagined how my dad must have felt when the wife he loved left him for someone else and even announced that his son wasn't his either. I was on my way to my dad's old apartment. I didn't care if he was my father or not. I was going to see the father I had always loved. I opened the doors with my key. The apartment was quiet. Walking into the room, I threw my bag on the couch. Nothing had changed. Everything was in its place as if time had stopped in childhood. I looked around the rooms. My father was nowhere to be found. Maybe he'd gone out to the store or to work. The front door creaked open. I looked around and saw my neighbor in the doorway. Welcome home, Euro. And Daddy is in the hospital. He has a heart attack. The day before yesterday, the ambulance took him away. The hospital was 2 blocks away from our house, so I walked there. My father was in the general ward. There were 7 other people laid there beside him. On the way I bought some fruit packets of keffi and juice. Hi, Daddy, I began in a deliberately cheerful voice. Instead of going to meet my son, you are hiding in hospitals. My father turned his head. His eyes widened in surprise. Hello, you're welcome home. You see, I've fallen apart. I'm sorry I didn't meet you. Come on, Dad. I'll get over it. Don't worry about it. I'm here for the long haul. I'll be working on domestic airlines from now on. So we'll live a little longer. I brought you something there. When we get home, you'll see. When are they planning to release you? I don't know, Euro. They don't say anything yet. We'll have to lie in the hospital at least for a couple of weeks. My father grinned and coughed. I noticed that he called me by my name and never called me his usual, Sonny. Yeah, Mom's work. Get well, Dad. When you get out of the hospital, we'll go to buy a cottage. Remember, you wanted a house in the country. Dad was silent and looked away. I sat with Father some more, trying to talk on distracted subjects. Then I said goodbye and went to find the attending physician. He reassured me, said that my father had a nervous overstrain and that with proper care, everything can be fixed. As I left the hospital, I got to thinking. I had an idea. My classmate Eagle worked at the Bureau of Forensic Medicine. I dialed his number and made an appointment. My mother called, but I dropped the call. I didn't have time for family meetings right now. Igor, I want to do a paternity test. I started talking to my classmate. But you'd be surprised, I already know the result. Having briefly outlined the situation to Igor, I continued. I need a certificate or conclusion that this is my real father. Euro, this is official forgery. Igor nervously twirled a box of matches in his hands. Don't worry, only my father will see it. Help me. Igor stood up from his chair. So here's the deal. Bring me the biomaterial. It's best if it's my father's hair. And go to the lab yourself. The girls will take samples from you. I'll see you at 4 o'clock today. I'll have an answer by tomorrow night. Just for the sake of our friendship, let's do it quickly. Eagle looked at me. I'll give you 2 reports, one real and one fake, and you decide what to do with them. Leaving the bureau, I dialed my mother's number. I listened to her lament for a long time, then explained that I would spend the night in our old apartment and call her tomorrow. Today, I still had a lot to do. It is clear that the next day at the appointed time I was at my classmate's place. There was only one paper on Igor's desk, at the very bottom of which was an impressive stamp. I do not understand, something did not work out. I looked at him anxiously. On the contrary, everything is all right. Igor handed me the report. Vitaly is the biological father of Yuri with a probability of 99%. My legs buckled. What does that mean? It means that your father is your father in every sense. So take your report and get out of here. Eagle laughed. Half an hour later, I was in the hospital with my father. Hi, Dad. How are you? How are you feeling? I adjusted the blanket, which had moved away. Thank you, Yura. I'm better. They said they'll let me get up tomorrow. Dad averted his eyes. Dad, why Yura? Not the son. Has something changed in our relationship? Or have you grown less fond of me? Didn't Mom tell you anything? She did. I know everything about her new husband and about her grandson. I grind. Can you read without your glasses? I will give my father the report. He read for a long time, and I saw his hands trembling. Then he looked at me. A tear was rolling down his cheek. Well, shall we buy the dacha? I smiled. I stayed with my father. I didn't explain much to my mother, and I didn't reproach her for anything. I didn't see any point in it. At first, she tried to talk me into moving in with her and her new husband. But eventually she calmed down. I did not tell her anything about the DNA test, and she lived with the certainty that my father is her Sergey. Time passed. I finally married a wonderful girl who worked on my flight crew as a stewardess. A year later, we had a son. We named him after his grandfather Vitaly. All this time, I had almost no contact with my mother and categorically forbade her to come over to our place. My father never remarried, although I periodically introduced him to different women. And then the hour came when my father died. I buried him next to his parents as he had requested. A year later, my mother's husband, Sergey, died as well. Mom was still living in the cottage, she didn't work, and she entrusted her husband's business to the manager. One day, I yielded to my wife pleased and decided to visit my mother with my family. I was met by a well-groomed, beautiful woman. She kissed me and my wife and suddenly froze like a stone. A deathly pallor spread over her face. She saw Vitalik, her grandson. It seemed as if first husband was standing in front of her, only very young. As he had been in those